Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Gary Ford. I'm president at DoubleRadius. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to introduce DoubleRadius to everyone, in case you don't know who we are. We're a 20-year-old fixed wireless and Wi-Fi distributor. We're 100% employee-owned going back to 2018. We cover North America and with out of 3 strategic warehouses, Charlotte, Salt Lake City, and Toronto. We have full service distributor with financing programs, technical services, certification training, consultation and integration, support and repairs, and a reseller program, the whole kit and caboodle. So that's my quick reminder who we are, but I'm just most importantly, we're moving along. And it's our goal of our webinars and these presentations to give you the tools and resources to build a better network. That being said, we're excited to be hosting today's webinar, Unifi Enterprise webinar with wifi-U. Our presentation is going to be led by Eric Weber from wifi-U. He's a good partner of ours and we have a great relationship. Eric is the owner and lead instructor at wifi-U, currently teaching Certified Wireless Network Administrator, training the Certified Wireless Trainer, Ubiquiti Broadband Wireless Administrator, and Ubiquiti Enterprise Wireless Administrator. He's also certified to do the Certified Wireless Network Professional, the CWNP, and he has certifications including MikroTik, Peplink, Cambium, Ruckus, Ikaye, and Air Magnet. And he's a designated Certified Wireless Network Expert number 308. All that's a mouthful to say he's really good at doing training and he knows wireless in and out. He doesn't put this on his resume, but he's also certified at being one of the nicest, most genuine people in the industry. He teaches with a passion that is rare and is inspiring, and we love to have him as a partner at DoubleRadius. Before we jump into the presentation, a couple important things to mention. First, as you have questions, enter them in the question box. Don't wait till the end. We'll jump in there and interrupt Eric as we need to. And second, after the webinar, a survey will pop up on the screen. Please take a minute for that, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. And we have a little surprise today with the survey that I think it'll be worth you staying on. So this is one of our most popular webinars we do every year, where we review some of the latest trends in the Ubiquiti products. So we're excited to get started. So Eric, I'll turn it over to you if you're ready.
Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you for that introduction. And I would want to say that I do get a chance to teach quite a bit of Ubiquiti. And the fun thing about Ubiquiti is that we don't really have anybody that we can call on for all the answers. So it's like this group of people who want to gain information. And so every time I teach a class, I learn something new about Ubiquiti. So I'm looking forward to your questions or perhaps your answers, and maybe we can help each other learn. I prefer to have a dialogue when we're teaching. So this will be new for me in presenting this as a webinar, because obviously I'm going to be doing most of the talking. With that said, let's kick this off and talk about Ubiquiti and the UniFi environment. And I thought we'd just start off with a quick overview of what we need in order to have a unified deployment. And so you can see that, first of all, we need a security gateway, some way to route us out of the network, right? And that will, Ubiquiti has security gateway devices that we can use. You don't necessarily have to use a Ubiquiti device for your gateway, but they do offer some, and it makes it for a tighter integration if you do use theirs. The controller, and now Ubiquiti has gone to calling it a network application, but I'll probably in this call it a controller more than I will a network application. But it is the management portion of for Ubiquiti. And then of course we're going to need some switches and some power on those switches to manage our UniFi access points. Okay, so those are kind of the 4 components of a network and a network deployment. And let's take a look at what product line they have. So the Unifi Gateways that you see on this slide, the USG, a lot of times referred to as the USG3. It's been around for a while. It's not as powerful as the Pro, but for smaller deployments, and I would say smaller deployments probably, 20 access points or less, 2,000 clients or less, the USG seems to work well. There are some limitations when you do intrusion protection, and those are fairly well alleviated with the USG Pro and the UXG Pro. So those three devices are gateways only, okay? And then the next two you see are the UDM and the UDM Pro. The UDM, the Unified Dream Machine, came out just a couple of years ago, and it's kind of your all-in-one device, right? So the top of that is there's an access point on the top of it, and you can see that there are ports there. There are, I believe it's 4 or 5, maybe. Yeah, I guess it's 5 ports that you can use, and then a WAN connection too. So it has built into it the software for the gateway and the controller or the network application. So it's kind of an all-in-one device. You've got the gateway, the controller, and an access point all there, and then ability to add more devices. And then the UDM Pro has a little bit more capability in that it has a hard drive built into it. So Ubiquiti has a line of cameras now, the Protect line, and we won't talk about that much today, but there's a hard drive built into that, and so the UDM Pro can house or host the Unifi Protect. It has the controller built into it, controller software, and the gateway all in one. Okay, so they also have a couple of other ways that you can manage the controller. So an older device that they have is the Unified Cloud Key. You can see that it was fairly limited in its capabilities. They came out with the Cloud Key Generation 2 and the Cloud Key Generation 2 Plus. And so with those devices, what you're doing is you can put an appliance at a location, or what we would refer to as a site, right? So you just have to picture in your mind, each site might have a controller. Now, as you grow, the next step up would be to host your own controller or to have someone host it for you. So it's a software controller, right? Software managed controller. And the nice thing about the controller and the gateways, and actually all the equipment, one of the nice things is that there are no like annual fees or anything, licensing fees for them, right? And so when you get a controller and you put in the application device, you get a instance, I'll call it, on the Ubiquiti cloud. And so if you're remote, you can access your devices via the Ubiquiti cloud, and you'll be able to manage the devices at a site. So anyhow, if you want to know more about that, come to one of our classes and we can get into it more. There's a lot of flexibility in the controller, and I think it's one of the advantages that Unifi has over some of their competitors. So all right, so let's take a look at just a couple of things. So this is a site view of what you would see at the controller. It has a dashboard. It'll show you the number of access points and switches that might be up, and just gives you an overall view into your network. And there's some ways to dig down into it, and it's fairly comprehensive. I think it competes well at the control management plane. You can see your devices from the controller, right? But I will say this: you don't have to have a controller running, and this is you don't have to have a controller running in order for your access points and switches to be operating, right? So if the network doesn't necessarily go through the controller, its packets are inspected for deep packet inspection and things like that at the gateway. So, but you can see the users from the controller, you can see your devices from the controller, and then you can get some nice stats Again, this is a deep packet inspection stats that you could get from the controller. All right. Okay. And then just quickly on the switches. So they have spent a lot of money on developing these switches. I looked just before this webinar, and there were over 20 different switches. So there's quite a few different options for you. So what are you looking for in a switch? Well, just quickly, I would say two important things is you want to have a switch that's going to have enough power on it to power the devices that you want to power, right? So a lot of different options. Be very careful. It's hard to go through those. You see that I have the USW24 and then the USW20 or Pro 24 and then the USW24 PoE. Okay, so make sure you're getting one that's going to give you enough power, and you should be aware of power budgets. And so that's another thing that we would cover in a class, but make sure that you get the switch that is right for your needs. And one of the biggest things to look at on their switches is power, okay? So if you have a switch and just a quick look into the controller, you can see the, I don't know how well you can see this, but you can get good data on what's at each switch port. So, and this is through the controller. So if you're looking at your controller and you want to see what's on certain ports, you can just hover over that and get the information on it. Okay, so that's the devices we need up until the point that we get to the Ubiquiti access points. All right, the gateway, the controller, and the switches. So with that, I'd like to take a look at this poll. So Gary?
All right, let's do our first poll. For which scenarios have you deployed UniFi APs? Quickly select large enterprises, small business, MDUs, campus, public, or municipal Wi-Fi's, or residentials. Give us a good understanding of where we are as a group, and then we can do some of the content based on that. Give it just a few more minutes, a few more seconds. Wouldn't do a minute on that. Lord, would we be here forever? All right, 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, that's it. There we go. So great. It's a good indication of where you're kind of your audience, Eric.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So not surprising, large enterprise, bravo for taking that on. That's a tough one. And so that municipal Wi-Fi also stands out as difficult. I think difficult to deploy no matter what you're doing. If it's Wi-Fi and you've got a large enterprise, God bless you. That's a tough one to take on. And then small to medium-sized business. So we see a lot of Ubiquiti playing well in that. So very good. All right, that gives me an idea.
Eric, from your point of view, where do you go from, how do you define large enterprise compared to a medium or a small business?
Well, large public venues. So that's a good question. Where is that delineation? Schools, arenas, large churches, those would all, I would consider those to be an enterprise deployment. I don't know if you saw on that slide, if I go back to it, but you would see that the cloud key, the generation 2 cloud key, had the cutoff at 2,000 clients, 40 access points, and 10 switches. I'd say if you're going beyond that, I would categorize that as an enterprise deployment. Now, the other thing that might be an enterprise deployment is if you've got multiple sites, right? So even if you had, 100 or 200 people, but you had 10 sites, that's definitely enterprise.
Okay, that's helpful, because I think a lot of people, when you get into that medium to large scenario, define it differently. So it's good we understand that.
Yeah, I think, as you're moving up the ladder towards enterprise, if you're going to have multiple sites and you're going to need you would need more a controller per site. But if you're hosting your own and you've got 10 or 15, you're probably enterprise layer. All right, good. So then let's see, we do have, let's see, how can I get off of this poll slide? There he is. Okay. So let's look at what Ubiquiti has to offer. And so I've kind of sliced this up a couple of different ways. Right now, the Ubiquiti access points are offered in AC. So AC is not the newest, not the newest of the IEEE standards, but it is what's been, it's the one before that. So we talk about Wi-Fi 6 now. And that's later than this. These would be Wi-Fi 5 devices. And so these have been around for a while, and they're, we're moving into Wi-Fi 6. But let's try and group these into, I want to just show you, I've tried to group these into the earlier models, which are on this slide, the AC, and then the AC wave 2. Okay, so we've got in the wave 1, we have these, what's this, 3, 4, 5, 6 devices, and what makes them wave 1 versus wave 2? Let me just talk about it briefly. So when 802.11ax was introduced, it was, or I'm sorry, AC was introduced, it was the next step after N. And so N was good because it gave us the capability to have multiple in, multiple antenna, what we call spatial streams. So we moved beyond just the 1 by 1 into 2 by 2 with N. And then with AC, we could now have up to 8 spatial streams on our devices. And you could have very wide channels. So before with N, we could have 40 megahertz channels. But with AC, we could have 80 megahertz channels, and we could have 160 megahertz channels, right? So very wide channels. When the standard or the amendment was introduced, the chipset makers didn't have the capability to go beyond 80 megahertz channels. So with this first grouping, really they have the capability to have up to 80 megahertz channels. Now they have the capability in 2.4 gigahertz. You'll see that they won't go that high most of the time, right? Okay, so then with the wave 2 devices, they went to 160 megahertz channels and introduced in that wave 2 what's called multi-user MIMO. And so I don't want you to, so I've said it once and now I want you to erase multi-user MIMO from your heads. It's until we get to AX, it's not been deployed well or supported well, I might say. But so how do we evaluate access points? Well, there's a couple of different ways to evaluate access points. The first one that is easiest seems to be the one that is at the bottom there, price, right? So we say, well, we have a small home, we'll just buy the cheapest access point we can, right? And so we just go with that AC Lite. It's $89. And it looks like it has fairly good capability. If you look at the 2.4 gigahertz rate, it could go up to 300 megabits per second, and 5 gigahertz rate, 867. That seems pretty good, and it actually is. One of the truisms, maybe I would say, of Wi-Fi is that we'll say typically the more money that you spend on an access point, the better access point that you're going to get. The problem is that at what level do I need to go to? So do I need, am I supporting a residential deployment where I could get away with an AC Lite? And I don't mean get away with it, it'll do what I need it to do. Or should I go with an AC Pro, or maybe move up the line to a more expensive device, right? In this grouping, maybe a Nano HD at 179 or the HD AP at 349. Pricing won't hurt you. However, you do need to know what you're going to get. So, comparatively, if I wanted to be supporting clients in 2.4 and 5, then I probably wouldn't be looking at the SHD, the XG, or the XG base unless there was a particular need for it. And they do well in their silo, I would say. But unless you know that that's what you need, you probably could do away with those and concentrate on the other ones. Okay, so I put some other categories in here, and I want to just go through those quickly. What I look for in an access point, which seems to improve things, is the 2.4 gigahertz MIMO and the 5 gigahertz MIMO. You see that. Let's just take the AC light, for example. It's 2x2 in 2.4 and 2x2 in 5. So what does that mean? Well, that means that it can create two, we call it spatial streams, but if you would think about it in the way of two connections with a client at one time, right? So now here's the, I don't know if it's a dirty little secret, but the connection to another device, it matters how many spatial streams our clients have, okay? And most client devices in today's environment, like almost all of them, have two spatial streams, unless they're older and they only have one, but there's very few that have more than that. So let's take, for example, if we were looking at that AC Pro, it says in 2.4 it has 3x3, and in 5 it has 3x3. Well, it's better than 2x2, but it's not a whole nother usable spatial stream. Okay, so if you have 2x2, you're probably going to be safe in most environments, right? Now, there are technologies above what we're going to talk about in this webinar that will help you. There's like some validation algorithms that are built into access points. And so if you have a 3x3, we should probably say 3x3 to 2 or something like that. But that's what I'm looking for if I want to improve my my environment. Now, I know it seems like a lot of us, we got stuck talking about rates, right? So how fast is my Wi-Fi? Well, there's a little bit more built into that, right? So that's an overall rate that they're showing, and that's just how they, you can compare them with other vendors. Your actual rate would depend on a lot of different things, but that would be one of the things that I'm looking at. Probably the most important thing. Okay, you'll notice on here that I didn't put clients. All right, if you don't get anything else out of this, I'm sure a lot of people know this, but don't rate an access point based on the number of clients. Okay, so how many? All right, this is I know this is just me talking is the way I talk about. How many clients can an access point support at once? The answer is 1, right? Because it's either transmitting or receiving, so there's only one client on the line or in the air on my airtime at once, right? So, and they all have to share that throughput. So just some things to put in your head, okay? All right, so the AC Wave 2 devices, you can see that they have more spatial streams for the most part than the other ones. And then you've got 3 that are the SHD, the XG, and the base station that I want to talk about, but I wanted to group these together this way. So what if we wanted to mount devices in the ceiling? What would be our choices? And so we could compare these on this slide and see which device we would want to use. And you can see that they go up by price there: AC Lite, the long range, and then the AC Pro. And then the Nano and the HD Flex are both $179. And then the big guy, the HD AP. And you can see, if you look at it, really what makes them more expensive is that they do go up in the number of spatial streams that they have in 2.4 and 5. Now the AC Pro has a secondary Ethernet port, and so does that HD AP. Just a word of caution, that's not PoE on that port, right? But it is a pass-through. So if you were going to add a network device directly to the access point, you could do it. And then you can see also the PoE mode. So as they get to be beyond 3x3s and up, you'll see that they're 802.3 AT versus the AF, right?
Hey, Eric, let me ask you a question. Can you overbuy, meaning if you bought the HDAP for a large residential and a small residential deployment, in the small residential deployment, is it too much of an AP to make it so the performance is not good?
Okay, no. However, it could be configured to be not good, because if we configured it with wide channels, we're going to cause a problem in our network, right? So one of the great advances is this very high throughput concept. And that's one of the things that these devices can do, is they can be configured for wide channels, which will, unless you're underground somewhere and you have one device that you're talking to, they're not helpful, okay? Now, so let's just assume that we just plug the HD in and we plug the AC Pro in. There's some auto configuration settings that Ubiquiti uses that won't be those large channels. And so my answer to that is no. Usually what the vendors do is they start with their high-end model and they build a spec for that, and then they determine what they could take out, and they take out more and more. So they start with the big guy and work down by taking capabilities out of it. Okay, so you're not going to get hurt by buying an HD. So that would be my answer.
Very helpful.
Yeah, okay.
Good.
Now, one of the other things I wanted to address is on these access points, you'll see that they have the antenna gain listed, right? And so one of the things that I hear about is, oh, we want to buy the long range because we want to get, because it just goes far. Yeah, no, that's not. Look, if you look at the antenna gain on all those devices, they're all the same until we get to that HD Flex and the HDAP. They have a different configuration, but we don't. I'm gonna make a statement. You may think that you care about coverage, and in a way you do care about coverage, but you also have to be concerned about capacity. So when I started doing Wi-Fi, I was doing Wi-Fi in hotels, and if we could get the Wi-Fi to work in the lobby and the swimming pool and out in the parking lot, we were heroes, right? Until like 4 or 5 or 10 people wanted to use it, and then then we weren't such heroes anymore. So my advice would be, don't be so concerned about antenna gain in a ceiling mounted access point. Really what we're looking for is capacity, and capacity would be aided by having more spatial streams. Okay? All right, so those are our ceiling mount choices. The HD Flex is kind of funny looking. It's a cylindrical thing. I think it was, and this is just me talking because I don't have any insight into Ubiquiti, but I think it's a nice device to just be able to put on a desktop. It has a nice cylindrical look. Aesthetically, it's not so bad. So anyhow, but it can also be ceiling mounted. So if you look at their product page, you'll see that there's a little, it shows you how you can mount it on the ceiling. All right, so those are our choices for ceiling mount access points. Ubiquiti also has these two devices, the AC in-wall, which has the 2 ports, and then the HD in-wall, so a $99 device. Kind of nice to be able to put this in a cubicle, right, down below, and be able to connect in a telephone, right, or even a computer, or printer, maybe something like that, and have Wi-Fi built in. So, I mean, at $99, that's a pretty good price to be able to have 2 Ethernet jacks. And what you don't see on that is that, you know, the little built-up portion on the bottom there, they fit right into a wall jack plate, right? So if you had Ethernet run into you know, into a wall, then you could connect that, and then you would have the ports that you could use for Ethernet directly and also have Wi-Fi. So those are nice devices. All right. These 2 devices, and I have got 3 pictures there, but there's actually 2 access points there, are used primarily for outdoor, but they can be used indoor. But primarily, if you're going to use, if you're looking for an outdoor solution, these might be good ones to go with. The AC Mesh, and then the AC Mesh Pro. I put the AC Mesh antenna, a little picture of it down at the bottom there. This, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but this can be paired with the AC Mesh. And so you can unscrew those smaller antennas, which are 3 dBi antennas, and screw on the mesh antenna there, and then that would give you 15 dBi. So what that does is, instead of the signal going omnidirectionally, you could point it. So let's say you wanted to put it up on the wall and broadcast out into a narrow area of maybe you get let's see, maybe it's a receiving dock. That might be a good place for it. And so you don't need it to go everywhere. You just need the Wi-Fi to go out where that truck is backing up onto your platform. You could use the antenna there with the AC Mesh. The AC Mesh Pro, as you can see, that its capabilities are much more. It's cost more, but those are great to use outdoors. So anyhow, I like both of those devices, but so that's that. Okay, all right, now we've got the oddballs. So let's take a minute and talk about these oddballs and try to get through these as quickly as we can. The Beacon HD, so there's a picture of it, 2 pictures of it up at the top there. It is a mesh device only, right? So it doesn't come with cables. It just, you just plug it into the wall, and it will use Ubiquiti's mesh technology to find another access point and connect with it and create a mesh network. So so it could, like, you know, rebroadcast, and so it can be used in areas where you just can't get a cable, but you do need to get Wi-Fi. It's a handy little device. It's my, when we're going through Wi-Fi, of course, we don't want to use mesh if we don't have to, but sometimes it'll call for it. All right, and the next device is the Security HD. So the Security HD is similar to the HD, but they added another radio in it on 2.4 and 5. And so what I was showing here, there's a, it's called AirView. And what it does is it constantly scans through the networks, because it dedicates a radio to do that, to find out what the band, you know, the 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz looks like. And so it can give you a constant view of what's going on. So all of the access points have the capability to do an RF scan, but in order to do an RF scan, they have to go offline in order to do that. So you could use SHD throughout your network perimeter, maybe, to see if there's interference coming in. And you can see it's $549, so it competes well with other vendors that have the similar capability. All right, and then there are 2 big guys, the XG and the XG base station. Very interesting. So I put a picture of the XG base station. This is the owner of well, the CEO of Ubiquiti. I guess there's a lot of owners now, but the Ubiquiti owns the Memphis Grizzlies basketball team, and so they've got their base station there with the Grizzly icon on it, so it's kind of neat. but it's has 3 5 gigahertz radios built into it, and each one of them has 4 spatial streams. So, if you're doing a large public venue, an arena, this would be a very good, well, it would be probably the best offering that Ubiquiti has for you. The XG in itself would be if you needed to do a ceiling mount versus a pole mount, you could use the XG. Okay. All right.
Hey, Eric, does the Beacon HD work with the ACLR?
Yes.
Okay, good. That was one of our audience questions, just making sure.
Yeah, good question. So you have to enable in the controller. You have to enable it, and then it'll work with any of the AC devices. So they sold it in their advertising. You'll see that it's paired with the UDM. Remember that one from the first slide, the Dream Machine. Had to think about it. They sell it that way, but no, it'll work with any of their AC devices.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's our lineup for the AC devices. All right. So we're going to get into Wi-Fi 6, and I think we've got another poll here.
All right. What best describes your interest in Wi-Fi 6 APs? You've already deployed, you're planning to deploy, still investigating, or not interested? Some of you in planning deploy may be waiting on them to arrive. They're probably sitting on a boat. All those everything else we'd understand, and take a few seconds there to answer the poll, and then we'll look at the results. 3, 2, 1. All right, let's look at the results. Boom. Still investigating. That's great.
Okay. You know what? And Gary, I would say this is kind of indicative of where we are as we move into Wi-Fi 6 or AX, just as an industry. There's not, the devices are just now becoming available. And, the question is, what do we get by going to Wi-Fi 6? I mean, we called Wi-Fi 5, or let's back up. We called Wi-Fi 4, 802.11n, high throughput. That was high throughput. And then when AC came along, it was very high throughput, right? So we had it, since 2016 or 2015, we've had very high throughput. Like, where do you go after that? So it's not very, very, very high throughput, right? So it's like, well, what do I gain if I go to 802.11ax? I want to spend some time talking about that. So I'm going to get a little bit geeky here, and let's take a look at something that I've tried to put together for you to see what that looks like. Oh, did I lose my mouse? Okay, so AX, also known as Wi-Fi 6, and it's also known, so we had, I told you we had high throughput with N, and that came out in 2009, and then very high throughput 2000, I think it was 2014 that the standard was written, but mostly deployed after 2016. And then, and that was very high throughput. And then 802.11ax is called high efficiency. Okay, so that's nice. We moved away from trying to go with these with high throughput, very high throughput to high efficiency. So efficiency is good. We like efficiency. So what I'm trying to show here is what makes it high efficiency. All right. So pardon my little drawings, but what I was trying to show you is that with AC and N, what I said before is that one person gains control of the air, the channel, right? And they get the whole channel, right? So whether they're a small packet or a large packet, they get it, and everybody has to wait until they're done. So let's say that bicycle represents somebody that is far away, and they gain access to the network. It's going to take them a long time to get across the bridge there, if you will. And we might have somebody, in that truck that is a fast mover with a lot of data, but he still has to wait. All right. So one of the big things that happened with AX is it opens up a multi-lane highway, if you will. It puts the access point in charge, and it groups clients, and it will allow them to share that. Let's see if I can. It allows them to share that channel. So, and that's called OFDMA. And I won't go any deeper than that. But what it does is it divides that channel. So let's say this is a 20 megahertz channel. It divides it up into resource units, right? And so we can see that it can handle more than one client at a time. Now, it may be that a client needs all of that 20 megahertz channel, but I will tell you that if you do any type of packet analysis, you'll see that most packets don't consume all of the bandwidth that is required, even on a 20 megahertz channel. Most of them are much less. And so now the access point can tell the clients, okay, you, and you get to share that 20 megahertz channel because you don't have much to transmit. So it makes it much more efficient. Okay, so here's an example of that channel. So we're looking at a 20 megahertz channel again, and trying to, it's in the air, so we have to kind of figure out how to display things. But here's in all the previous generations, it was one person gets a line, then the next person gets a line, the next person gets a line. But you'll see with AX that it can be shared, right? So it'll show you can have multiple people on it at once. All right, so let's take one more view, and just all right. So what do we have in the AX lineup? I probably shouldn't have had that AC up there, because these are the 4 devices that we can get right now. And you'll see that with those, you'll see that there's 4 different devices, 2 that are available now. You can find that that Wi-Fi 6 Pro and the Wi-Fi 6 Mesh if you really dig, but like Gary said, that they're most likely on a boat. But you can see the prices are nice, right? So you could get into Wi-Fi 6 at $99 with their Lite solution, or you can move up to some more expensive ones. But those are the 4 that you could get, and so these are kind of the next step after AC is AX. Okay, I imagine there's questions about that, and if you wanna hit me with some, we could try to take some. But these are Gary, I'll let you have the floor now.
Well, hold on. We do have one question. Do any of the AC Wave 2 devices have mesh capabilities like the UAP ACM for wireless uplink?
Oh, okay. So this is kind of neat. All of them do. So
Okay.
yeah, so if I have an AC Mesh or the Mesh Pro or an AC Lite or any of those devices, as long as I have it turned on in the controller, I can mesh, or I can wirelessly link. I think wirelessly link is probably a better word for it. It is a mesh technology, but you don't necessarily have to have the mesh or the beacon. You could do it with any of those devices. Now, a caution on that. Watch out. Every time you add a meshed device, so if I have one device that I'm meshing to, then I cut my throughput in half, right? Because it has to make the link. The broadcasting device, or the parent device, is still broadcasting Wi-Fi to all its clients, but it's making the link. So it's, if you will, it's spending half of its time talking to its extended device, right? And so it cuts it in half. And every time you add another one to that parent, it cuts it in half again. So you could theoretically have up to 4 meshed devices connected to one parent. But at that point, you would really be cutting your throughput down for each one of those hops.
Okay, so here's a couple Wi-Fi 6 specific questions.
Okay.
What is the capability, the compatibility for Wi-Fi 6 devices? They need to be Wi-Fi 6 compatible, like, or can you just put the U6LR into your network and it work?
It'll work. So
okay, go ahead.
yeah, so it's backward compatible. In fact, that's one of the things we some people don't really like, because it's backward compatible all the way back to when Wi-Fi started, right? All the way back to 802.11 and then 11B and G. So let's take it into reality. And is it going to work with AC? Definitely. We have right now AC access, I'm sorry, AX access points that are deployed, but we don't have very many client devices in the network that are Wi-Fi 6 capable right now. So for iPhones, for example, iPhones, I think the iPhone 11, I'm pretty sure that's right, is the first one that would have offered Wi-Fi 6 capability. So anything before that wouldn't have. And Samsung has them now, but it hasn't been in for for real long. So we don't have a lot of client devices. So these devices will need to work and be compatible with the previous versions and they always will be, right? So at Wi-Fi 6, they're backward compatible.
So in that same line of thought, someone asked, this is a do you think question.
Okay.
Do you think the newer data compression technologies will solve this problem in the future, like compatibility with Wi-Fi 6 or the ability to stream 4K? Will newer firmware make the older devices work, or will we be expected to have Wi-Fi 6 devices or greater in our networks as we go forward?
Wow. Okay. That's one you're stretching the limits of my capability. I'd love to have a face-to-face conversation with whoever asked that question, because it sounds like you know a lot about what's going on there. Only thing I would say, and hopefully this is helpful, is that in order to go to Wi-Fi 6, you would need a hardware update. Okay, you would need a specific device that supported Wi-Fi 6. You couldn't like do a firmware upgrade. And I hope that's what you were asking. You can ask a follow-up if you need to. But because it sounded like you were asking about some compression capabilities. And yes, the smaller that we can make those packets, the more compressed we can make, our video packets, the better it's going to be for Wi-Fi, because we do suffer from being able to. There's a lot that has to go on in Wi-Fi in order for it to make the connection, right? So there's a lot of what we call control and management frames that have to be passed back and forth, because an access point is like a hub, right? Because it's still going to be that the one-to-one connection, although it's going to be better than that with AX. But anyhow,
Is it saying it more simply and maybe more elementary, the way I understand it, is you can compress the technology or the data down so much, but still on your end where you're going to watch it, you're going to need something to unpack it.
I think, yeah. Yes, okay. I would say that's probably a good way to put it.
Okay.
I mean, I think, I would say this too is, really when you're buying PCs, it's similar in access points in that, the newer the device, Wi-Fi is, you know, what, 25 years old now. 1997 it started, and it's always improving. So the newer devices are going to take advantage of the better coding, you know, the improvements that we've made, that we've stacked upon each one of the different amendments that have been out. So
it doesn't necessarily make the older devices obsolete. It just makes, there is a transition that in the long run, you'll need some better hardware to handle all the capabilities.
okay, so that's a question that I think that as an industry we've been struggling with, and you know, for a long time we wanted to have the most throughput we could, right? The most throughput we could that's like, if I can have an access point with the most throughput, the very high throughput, that's great. But we kind of reached that, right? With the AC, it's like I don't really need a wider channel or a bigger hose, right? I just need to be able to manage people or manage the devices that want to talk and take advantage of that. So in smaller deployments, like AC is going to be fine, but you will see a big advantage if you move to an AX device in a large public venue. So all those enterprise guys out there, like if you're in a school, for example, and you've got, you know, lots of students that you need to support, I would be looking at Wi-Fi 6 for that. Whereas for, you know, for a static environment, if I was supporting an office building, I wouldn't be, I would, you know, expect to at some point go to Wi-Fi 6, but I wouldn't be concerned that I'm missing out at this point. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
And we have a couple other questions and some of them are real specific that we may address specifically with those people afterwards. I did want to say, and you see the screen, we actually have worked with Ubiquity and we have a number of the Wi-Fi 6's devices for you people, you participants. And if in the survey, if you'll just say you have an interest in purchasing them, we'll have one of our reps call you and coordinate that purchase. So we have a limited number, but I suspect if based on the number of attendees, we should be able to meet all of the needs if you have an interest. So we think we did drag a few off the boat for us, and hopefully there's a lot more coming. We have a lot more ordered, and I know Ubiquity is excited about releasing these to everybody. So really appreciate everybody's time today. Eric, it was wonderful. I think if we, as you say, we could nerd out and talk for hours on this. I thought this was a good overview. A couple of people have left some additional questions that we'll get back to you, but if you have anything else, put it on the survey form and we'll reach out to you individually, either contact through us through DoubleRadius, or we'll have Eric reach out to you. Anything else? There we go. We always like you to sign up for our newsletter too, so we can keep you updated on these activities. But otherwise, we really appreciate your attending today, and thank you very much, Eric, and thank you, group.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Have a great day, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye.